Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the OEB Climate Related Evaluation Criteria Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. Thank you for joining this afternoon. And I'll just quickly walk through the agenda, then we'll just do a quick round of introductions. So we're going to start with, after the introductions, we'll talk about the one public comment that was received in advance of this meeting. We'll revisit the draft grant application guidance that we went into some detail at the last RAC meeting. And then we'll dive back into the draft rule language. We'll kind of play it by ear when it comes to breaks. We'll try to read the Zoom room and budget breaks accordingly. And then finally, we'll have a fiscal impact of the draft rules discussion, and then wrap up in next steps. So promise to get everybody out of here by 4, and if we're really efficient with our time, maybe much sooner, but we'll see. So let's go around with some introductions, and I'll begin. My name's Eric Hartstein. I'm OEB's Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator, and I'll just call on people as I see them on the screen. So Jesse.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OEB.
Great. Heather.
Hi, Heather Hendrickson, District Manager at the Hood River Soil and Water Conservation District.
Welcome, Heather. Dallas.
Hi, everybody. Dallas Holder-Freeze, the Director of Regenerative Ranching at Sustainable Northwest.
Thanks, Dallas. Helena.
Hi, Helena Linnell, Biological Planning and Operations Manager for the Coquille Indian Tribe here on the Southern Oregon coast.
Great, thank you. Bruce.
Bruce Taylor in Portland with the Ag Heritage Commission.
Great, welcome, Bruce. Natasha.
Hey everyone, Natasha Bellis with Deschutes Land Trust based in Bend.
Welcome, Natasha. Let's go, Alex.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Rice with the North Fork John Day Watershed Council in Long Creek, Oregon.
Thanks, Alex. Teresa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Huang. I'm the Partnerships and Planning Manager with Urban Green Spaces Institute in Portland.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. Guy.
I'm Guy Sievert. I am a board member at the Nestucca, Nesco, and Sand Lake Watersheds Council here on the North Coast.
Great. Welcome, Guy. And Nicole.
Hello, everyone. Nicole Bettinardi, Executive Assistant for OEB.
Thanks, Nicole. So we may or may not have 1 or 2 other RAC members kind of joining as we go for the remainder of the afternoon. And if so, we can, I'm sure, catch them up. So moving on to the next agenda item, which is public comment. So we did receive the written comment from Megan Kemple with Oregon Climate and Agriculture Network, and this was received in advance of the planned March RAC meeting that we had to cancel. So we just forwarded it over yesterday afternoon, and we'll consider that at this meeting. Megan's recommendation is to use the definitions that are recognized by federal agencies or internationally recognized sources if possible. And she pointed to definitions recently adopted by the Oregon Global Warming Commission on carbon sequestration and carbon storage. And for those that may not know, the Oregon Global Warming Commission was created by the Oregon legislature and plays a coordinating role in both tracking greenhouse gas emissions in the state and developing recommendations to reduce emissions. So I'm going to suggest that we consider these recommended definitions when we discuss the latest version of the rules here in a little bit. And we don't have any other written comment, and no one signed up to provide verbal comment. So
And
any questions?
Eric, I'll just add, I just wanted to add that a little bit more context. So the Oregon Global Warming Commission Natural and Working Lands is currently undertaking an effort to identify activity-based community impact metrics for the state to track towards carbon sequestration and storage goals for natural and working lands. So there's this advisory committee that they've convened. I think there's experts from all over the state and all different kinds of habitat types. So there's like blue carbon, agriculture, forests, and this advisory committee, and there's also some technical committees that are associated with it as well. Basically, they have come up with their own suite of definitions that the Natural and Working Lands group, as they develop these metrics, is going to be working off of. And so that's where these two definitions, because Megan is part of that advisory committee. So I can direct folks to the website if you want to look at like the meeting recordings and things like that. Unfortunately, their full definitions document isn't available on the website, so we couldn't send it to you and give you that link, but you can see the committee like working through the different definitions if you watch the video recordings. So just a little bit more context as to where these two came from and why she was recommending them.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. That's real important context. Thanks for sharing. Okay, and actually maybe I'll just turn it back over to you, Jesse, to talk a little bit more on our draft application guidance and the status there.
Yeah, and so as you may recall, for those of you that weren't at the last RAC meeting that we had, we came to the meeting and shared some examples of draft grant application guidance to demonstrate how we've incorporated or would incorporate the climate criteria into the grant application questions and what kind of content we would be looking for from applicant responses to help meet these criteria. So we spent quite a bit of time at the last RAC meeting walking through different grant application types like technical assistance, restoration, monitoring, and showing, here's an example of what the grant application question might be related to the criteria for disproportionately impacted communities. Here's an example question of what it might be for one of the criteria related to adaptation and resilience. And then we showed an example response. And we had a lot of great feedback from the RAC members, both during the meeting, and then we got some feedback from folks after the meeting, including just where there might be some places to actually develop out more content that people would like to see a little bit more information, a little bit more developed out in the example, so like more thorough, which was really great feedback. We also mentioned at the last RAC meeting that simultaneous to all of this happening, there's a group of folks at OWEB, a team that's currently working on revising and updating all of our grant applications. So for restoration, technical assistance, all of those applications are trying to get streamlined and shortened because we've gotten a lot of feedback that the applications are they're too long, they're redundant. And so one of the efforts that's going on right now is to try and figure out how that can be simplified. So we've been working with them to make sure that whatever guidance and the kinds of questions that we're asking related to climate criteria fit into the new grant application revisions that they're making. And so we don't have any new guidance to share at this time, but just know that that's something that we're working on with them and trying to make sure that those two efforts are complementary so that we're not providing you all with examples of, question types and guidance that then you wouldn't see again because the application has changed so much. And so we're just trying to figure out how we can best either essentially feed in the climate criteria into the new questions that they've written, or if we're going to ask those climate criteria separately. So we're working a lot with that team of folks to make sure that these two efforts are complementary. And we we'll have updated guidance once we have more of the final draft of those revised grant application questions. But just know that that is something that we're working on, and we did take a lot of the feedback that we got from folks into consideration as we're updating the examples for responses. So I think that's, Eric, did I forget anything?
No, I don't think so, Jesse. Are there any questions? Okay. And I see that we have a phone number that just joined, 8512. Okay. Well, when we get, maybe when you get a little better connection, we can introduce you. Okay, so let's move on to the fourth draft of the rule language. So Jesse, if you don't mind pulling it up. Great, thank you. Okay, so at the last meeting, we spent a fair amount of time in the first and second proposed criteria. So we figured we would try to start on the third criterion today and then go back up to the first and second criteria. And then as we're kind of going along, we can consider the definitions. So starting with the third criterion here, how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions or long-term carbon sequestration or storage has informed the project. And this is where Megan Kempel's comments and suggested edits to the definitions on carbon sequestration and carbon storage should be considered. So does anybody have thoughts, questions, concerns on how the criterion reads right now? Okay, not seeing any.
So let's just ask the question. I'm not going to, greenhouse gas emissions reductions from what? I'm not quite clear what the phrase is referring to. Some baseline or compared to alternative ways to do it, or it's just a little, I mean, I'd be fine without reductions. I mean, have consideration of greenhouse gas administrations or carbon sequestration. It's just me.
So how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions and taking out reductions? Bruce?
Yeah, I'm just not sure what reductions we're talking about, what it refers to.
Okay.
So, Eric, the way, excuse me, this is Guy, the way I read this before is that if we submit a grant and we have a number of, we've got contractors using equipment, whatever, part of it is if we wanted to take into consideration reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that may be caused by this particular project, we would maybe we would consider more local contractors. So we're not having people drive from, in our case, from the valley, which would cause more greenhouse gas emissions. We would maybe favor people who are using battery operated equipment rather than diesel or gas. So I always thought it as reduction from what we're doing now. If we add to our own criteria in selecting how we're going to do these particular projects, that we consider kind of the least harmful in terms of gas emissions, which would mean a reduction of what we would have if we just continue normally. That's how I read it, and that's one example.
So reductions in this case from sort of business as usual.
Yes.
Okay. What do others think?
I'm also having a hard time with that word reductions. I think incorporating or considering greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's choosing a local, in your example, Guy, choosing a local contractor versus somebody else because of their locality and thus reduced amounts of greenhouse gas emission due to their mobility of their equipment. You're still considering greenhouse gas emissions without saying the word reduction. So I think it could still work.
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of struggling with this one as far as when it comes down to an applicant, whether it's a tribal organization or a watershed organization or, somewhere in between, of if I was applying and looking at this, how would I write my response, I guess? And then on a reviewer side, how do you judge whether somebody has met the metric? Have they really considered it? How have they considered it? And is there, what's the cost associated with considering these things?
Yeah, thanks, Elena. First, Jesse, thanks for crossing out reductions. I'm seeing some people nodding along while Helena was talking there. So unless there's heartburn, I think we can consider eliminating reductions there. And to your question about, as an applicant or reviewer, how would you look at this evaluation criterion and then craft an application? I think that's where our guidance is going to play a real important role in allowing folks to see how it will be used in an example. And we're leaving these intentionally pretty broad with some interpretation to be done by the applicant and then the reviewers as well. And this is not unique to this criterion alone, that especially kind of as these evaluation criteria are being applied, we want to keep these fairly broad and fairly qualitative and allow folks an opportunity to describe in their grant application how they are considering greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration and storage within their project.
So Eric, if your intention was, if we're in agreement on number 3 in terms of the criteria, then if we look at the 2 definitions that refer to 3, carbon sequestration and carbon storage, I would agree with the public comment that I think both the definitions that she offered were better than ours. they're clear, and I think ours, it points out kind of, we kind of extended our definitions into areas that are a little iffy. So I would also recommend that we just take word for word the recommendations that she gave us in a public comment.
Okay, I see Natasha agrees in the chat. I think here's a thumbs up from Bruce, thumbs up from Heather, thumbs up from Dallas. Are there any, oh, and welcome, Anne. Anybody have any issues with not, or with adopting the recommended definitions for carbon sequestration and carbon storage? Okay. Noted. Thanks, Jesse. Other thoughts, questions on the third criterion?
I think, and this is Guy again, I know there's been discussion of, that especially some of us in more rural communities, having access to contractors. Let's just take this as another example of contractors that have the ability to switch over to more battery driven equipment. And, in our kind of balancing of, okay, we want local people, that in and of itself reduces greenhouse gas emissions when we hire locally rather than from a distance. But we may be hiring somebody locally who doesn't have the financial ability to change over some equipment or whatever to, battery operated equipment. And I can't remember who made the earlier comment. I mean, how do we, when we apply and the guidance that we're given, when we talk about, well, what's your consideration? So, a local watershed council may say, well, we're trying to balance to get to have more local people in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. That's less, but and then also on the other hand, we're trying to promote our local economy, because we also have to give a report to our county commissioner to tell them how many jobs we brought and how much money we put into the local economy, versus consideration of having somebody from the outside who may have more modern equipment and instead of diesel driven something, they have battery driven something. So I can just see when you're filling out an application and responding to number 3, all the considerations that are given, and they're multiple, and they're not all greenhouse gas based, because some of them are, again, like trying to promote the local economy. So I think the guidance is going to be important here, knowing how much is you're asking the applicant to balance all these particular factors.
Yeah, Guy, I think that's absolutely fair. And for the record, we're not going to be requiring grantees use contractors that are using electric equipment, particularly as we're still in the early stages of all of this. And, we understand that there's definitely limitations, especially as you get into heavier equipment. But in certain areas, there may be contractors that do rely on electric or battery powered equipment for some of or all of their contracting needs. That might not be available everywhere.
Right.
But I think your example of, well, we're using local contractors, you know, that I think gets at the greenhouse gas emissions side of this criterion, and not having to drive hundreds of miles to and from a project site. And then also don't forget the second part of this criterion around, you know, does the project involve, you know, riparian or other types of planting that would then get to that, your carbon sequestration and storage.
Right. And the other balance of that, again, is the promoting the local economy. And as said here in the rural areas, that's an important factor and something we also have to report on, not to OWEB, but to the county. So,
yeah. And I also don't want to, I should say that there may be times when you don't have a local contractor to do a highly specialized project. And, you know, I think that's understandable from a reviewer standpoint. You know, I'm thinking specifically of, you know, helicopter placement of large wood into streams. You know, if, you know, most of the time you're going to have to fly in a helicopter and then weigh those balances. The way that equation is, the placement of probably much larger pieces of wood in a stream, is that worth the trade-off of having the cost of a helicopter? Okay, any other comments or questions on this one? Jesse, how are we doing?
We're good.
All right. Okay, so I'd say we move up then to, do you want to go in reverse order? So go up to number 2. You see highlighted 2, Jesse, so let's do that. How changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project and how the project will contribute to durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems, including human communities. Thoughts on criterion number 2? We did talk about this a little at the last meeting. Yeah, Bruce.
Well, I don't know when I should be saying this, but I'd like to go back. This to me is what this rule is all about. And having it being number 2 out of 3, I'm a little concerned that the way the rules are written, it's going to be interpreted that all these things are really somehow equal in weight. When if I was a reviewer, this would trump everything. The other 2 are really best practices and bonus points if you do a particularly good job of them. But I would always favor a project that has a significant contribution to adaptation and resilience over one that had an insignificant one, but, you know, said, we're going to do a really good job on reducing our minuscule greenhouse gas emissions. And I say that in part, the Ag Heritage Commission just went through our first round of grants, and we have a bunch of criteria. And I felt sorry both for the reviewers, who I think didn't have to do this, but the staff then at the end had to rank the projects. And they had no basis for anything other than saying, well, we weight them all equally. So if this one is high and that one's low and this one's medium, then we just, 3, 2, 1 average sort of thing. And they really aren't all the same. This to me is, the most important element of the criteria here.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I think that's a fair comment, and I'm sure there will be some reviewers that feel the same.
Did we,
I'm
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Guy.
Well, I'm trying to remember if last time, I think we discussed a little bit about what the climate change projections would be for the different areas in Oregon, and that somehow needs to be agreed to, or OWEB or whomever. I mean, if it's a multi-agency group that says, here are the standards that, I mean, or here's the, the Oregon climate, when I get these things every quarterly, the Oregon climate thing, but what are we going to use so that when people are filling out an application, they can say, for my area here in the Oregon coast, in our case, this is the climate change predictions for the next whatever, and here's how we're responding to that. So we're all using the same data point to come off of.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. I see Alex and Teresa, you both put your hands up. Is this in response to Guy's question? So Teresa shaking your head no, but Alex, I think you're nodding yes.
Yeah, no, I kind of wanted to put in Guy. I think that the sort of that what you said did come up. I remember discussing it. It was a while ago. We were all different people back then, but I think sort of what we talked about, and this is like the way we do it out here, is there's a few there's guidance at different levels that and it could be a little bit hard in certain areas to find that guidance, but I think that the whole idea behind this was more creating the impetus for you to go find just the best guidance possible for your area on predicted climate change, at whatever granular scale you're able to get it. Not necessarily that this because it's true, this was as true when I worked in Michigan as it is here. The smaller the scale, the less information you have, to predict future climate change. And so I think it was more, what have you done to sort of find out what that's going to look like in your area and what you need to respond to, more than scoring based on our, here's what climate's going to do, and we're going to score you based on how you're responding to that. If that makes any kind of rambling sense.
So part of the application or project would be your demonstration of what sources you used to predict climate change for your area. And I mean, part of the review would be, are those legitimate sources or something?
Yeah, I think.
Did you do your due diligence?
In the sample questions, there's a question that is sort of how, it's not even how are you responding to climate change, it's how is climate change affecting the project and the things that the project is concerned with. Right. And I think that's where you would say, here's what we think is going to happen and why, here's the sources or what have you, that sort of demonstrates that. And then there's also a space to say, here's how we're responding to that.
So you're not looking for guidance from OWEB or anyone else. You feel that the applicant should be doing that on the local scale on their own.
I think guidance would be great when it comes out, but in the interim, I think it's like, so for us, we use the USDA, and I think specifically the Forest Service has a Blue Mountains vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And so we kind of pull from that. That's like the best document for this scale, but it's at the scale of like Northeastern Oregon and Eastern Washington. But we're able to sort of glean, there's some sort of system specific stuff in there that we're able to utilize and extrapolate that information to make, just like anytime you're talking about climate change, the best educated guess.
Yeah, good example. And you know, Alex, just as separate from this, we should work on that on the, and now see, you know, to provide some of that guidance for everybody across Oregon. Make sure that they have those kind of that access to that. Okay.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alex. And good question, Guy. And did you have a specific question or comment on that topic?
Not a question. It is just a comment. I think Alex made an excellent point about scale. And I think this is also one of those examples where the guidance document is going to be useful. And to note that the guidance document can't possibly include everything. And so to some degree, yes, then applicants will be bringing in and citing sources that may be more accurate for their area. But to the degree that there is a lot of information and then a lot of information will be updated, I think it's important, or it would be great to include some vetted resources in OWEB's guidance document that could help point applicants in the right direction as well.
Excellent. Yes. Okay, Teresa.
Yeah, I kind of want to comment based on Alex and Bruce's comments. And so in addition to scale, which I think is a really great point, I would also like add in locality of into the guidance, because a project, like, even though, you know, say if we're in a more rural county in Oregon, question 1 and question 3 might be more of a bonus point. But if we're talking about a more urban area, such as the Portland metro area, question 1 and question 3 I would think it would have a much more important role, and not just a bonus point compared to maybe the locality of the project. So that's just my thought as someone who's working from a more urban area.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Teresa. Other thoughts on criterion 2? We did hear from one of the RAC members who is probably going to be a little bit in and out today, if they're able to join at all, on the last phrase there of including human communities into. And the suggestion was to, because we talked about that in the past as important to include in the criterion, but we should also then include it in the definition. So in the durable adaptation resilience for ecosystems, it would read the extent to which a project is expected to help an ecosystem, including human communities. Yeah, just like
and
that.
the comment was what, Eric, about human communities?
So it's referenced in the criterion, the end after ecosystems.
Yeah.
So then we would just match it up to the definition. So ecosystem, including human communities. So basically, so the definition language and the criterion language are in a little better alignment. So any heartburn on that? And then the other recommendation is still in that definition, was to change the or in front of recover to and. So it will read the extent to which a project is expected to help an ecosystem, including human communities, adjust. Probably take out that second or, So respond to and recover from a new or changing environment.
And my comment there earlier was that into the future was redundant, since we're talking already about new or changing environments. That just would be the future. And it just seems like a dangling phrase there. I mean, I guess if somebody wanted to talk about future change, put future new or changing, and that wouldn't be redundant. It would be redundant as well, but it just seemed like an odd phrase at the end. But I think somebody at our last meeting or something wanted that there, and so I didn't want to say that there was a reason for that I can't see.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Guy. And thanks, Jesse, for the edit there. Heather, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just, I guess I'm having a little issue with the recover from, since the climate is going to be new or changing. So really what we're doing is adapting and responding and adjusting to it. Recovery to me, I don't know, does that imply that we're going back to some state that it was in, which may not be possible?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, Heather, and that this says that basically if we keep the and recover, it means we're doing the adjusting, responding, and that's leading to a recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And
Like,
that
and
may
that
not
to
be
me-
the case.
Yeah, that may not be the case. We're adapting to these new climate conditions. So I mean, in a way we might recover from some event, but we're never going to recover from a warmer climate. We're going to just have to adapt to it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's awesome. Nodding heads there. And Bruce in the chat agrees, prefer or recover. So back to the original language.
Yeah.
Or remove it. Sorry, I was confused by that. Am I removing recovery or am I keeping it in and adding, I'm changing the and back to or?
I think we're changing it back to an or.
I would say resilience, implies that recovery may be possible, but adaptation is probably, the route of adapting to and changing in ways that work. So I'd leave them. I think both are possible, but they don't necessarily go together.
Okay. Great. And are we all good with removing into the future? Thumbs up, nodding heads. Okay. And anything else on either the second criterion or in that definition?
What I guess I just missed. Did we not want to use the term adapt or in that definition? Because right now we're talking about adjusting, responding, or recovering. And I agree with the comment, and I can say from experience here, we spent a couple of years arguing literally over whether our communities here on the coast were going to adapt or recover or be resilient to climate change. It was really important. That language is very important to folks here. And the adaptation language was one of surrender to some people. And So it was a long debate, and I just think it's important if we believe that adaptation is a critical part of what we're doing. I guess we have, I guess it's part of the durable adaptation first line. I guess that covers it, I guess, huh? Except if you can't use the word adaptation in the definition of durable adaptation. I guess that's it.
I think you hit on it there, guy.
Yeah, I'm just like, but it just seems odd then we're talking about adjusting, responding, and recovering.
Yeah.
In a definition of adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think even the IPCC, I think the commonly accepted definition of adaptation calls it adjusting, the process of adjusting to a new or changing environment. So I think it's pretty consistent with other
that covers it. Yeah.
definitions.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Just one quick question. The recover from language, now that we're focusing on it, is it useful to put recover from like a climate related threat as opposed to, because the way it's worded now makes it kind of sound like we're recovering from the environment. That's kind of the adaptation piece. So maybe adding an additional phrase to go with recover from might be more clear.
Yeah, that I see what you mean. Yeah. Are we recovering from this new environment or an event that happened that or yeah.
Okay, Jesse, thank you. On the spot too. How's that look for folks?
Yeah.
I get the idea. I don't know. The climate related event is very nebulous.
Maybe from climate related events so that it's plural. But I could see this being, a flood, a heat dome, a wildfire,
Long time drought.
long time drought.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's needed, but would it make sense to say climate change related events?
Yeah.
I mean, the tough part is that we're all living it, so it's not like something in the future anymore.
Right.
Yeah. Great. And then Jesse, you had disturbance up there for a moment.
I did. You just often hear that term used when you're talking about recovering from something disturbance event.
Might I suggest disturbances as a replacement for events, just because I think all the examples that were there's pulse and there's press disturbances, and every example that was thrown out was one or the other. So
yeah, good point. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Climate change related disturbances. Does that work for folks? Okay. Seeing some heads nod. Okay.
Well, not to be too picky, but many disturbances are climate related, and I think what we're talking about, you more technical people, stochastic changes related to changing climate, stochastic events or something like that. It's those abrupt kind of things. We have lots of slow motion changes out there, but I think what we're trying to talk about are those singular sorts of disturbance.
So let's
Just seems
test
like it's
that.
getting messy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask folks about that, because I was thinking if it was more the slow motion impacts, but yeah, Bruce, you had a different interpretation there. So
It's partly coming from events.
okay,
Disturbance, a lot of ecosystems are disturbance dependent. I mean, that's just part of ecological processes. So I just think we're making our things more complicated here.
so would you suggest not having any of so basically the way it read before, Bruce, the changing environment?
I can't remember what it said before, but I think so.
Okay. It was, or recover from a new or changing environment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that too. I think in order to keep it less messy.
Okay. So, we added some language there and we removed it. Are people okay with how it reads right now? Or is there a contingent for the climate change disturbance language? Okay.
Yeah, I hate to be reopening this, so I'm happy to stay where it is. But I think what we're talking about is adapt to the effects of a changing climate. It's the effects. It's maybe recover from the effects.
So recover from the effects of a new or changing environment.
Yeah, to me, I would even say climate, because it's the new environment is part of the effect of a changing climate.
Is that about right, Bruce?
I think so. I don't really want to claim it. I don't know if it's
Okay. Do we need to include new in that? I mean, if it's changing, doesn't that mean it's new?
say no.
I'd advocate for nixing new, because there's sort of an implication there of an arrival point when the nature of climate change is instability.
We'll get there.
Okay. How's that look for folks? See more
Much
nodding
better.
heads? Okay. All right. Well, I think we're at a good spot with that definition.
One additional word, I'd say adjust to, since we have respond to and then or recover from.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, thanks all for that discussion. Okay, so I think we're ready to hop up to the first criterion. And we spent a fair amount of time here at the last RAC meeting. And what we see here is a change from the previous version to this version, which is how engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change has informed or will inform the project. So I'll give people a moment to absorb that. And then ask for feedback. Or did we talk it all out at the last meeting and we're good?
I'm good.
I remember all this discussion, but remind me why we had to put or will inform the project. What does that cover that informed? I'm submitting an application. I'm describing how much my engagement has been with local communities and how that has informed the project. Is there an expectation that I'm going to put something else in the in there that says, in the future, here's how I'm going to use local communities to inform the project that I'm applying for now?
Yeah, it's a good question, Guy. And the discussion around that was maybe this project in of itself will be a community engagement type project or a technical assistant project that's going to lead to something on the ground.
Okay.
And so you're going to need to do some engaging with the local communities.
I got it. So if the project is not a one-time event, but a TA grant that'll last in a couple of years, and okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we going to get to the definition now?
Sure. So along with that, let's get to the definition. So, we talked about this again a fair amount at the last meeting. But are there additional thoughts on the definition?
Well, again, I am one who thinks we're trying to use the how we would describe or how we would identify communities disproportionately impacted by something, which economic, social, whatever, housing, food, a lot of societal issues. And we are used to coming up with, okay, here are the folks, much of which is based on access to power or financial or political power, those kinds of things. And so we kind of come up with a standard list. but I think it sends the wrong message for me about climate change. And climate change is going to impact all of us. And some of us are going to be impacted more than others, but I don't think it's based on the categories that you would identify for other social economic impacts. But climate change is going to impact those of us who it's going to be based on location. And as I know, I argued this last time, or at least presented this last time. And I'll just give you one real quick example, just locally. Our and a lot of coastal watershed, a lot of coastal water districts, a very small source water areas come off the coast range, and we're going to be really impacted by climate change. We already have, and projects that are, for example, here in our area, using beavers to create natural storage in the upper shed, is helping us become more resilient to the climate change, so that the longer, hotter, drier summers, when we have our most population here, tourism, that we'll have drinking water for everybody. Now, the lack of drinking water impacts all of us who live here equally. You could be a very wealthy, privileged individual and not have drinking water, as well as somebody of any other category you want to come up with. So I think we, in some ways, do a disservice by thinking that climate change disproportionately impacts certain peoples and not others, based on these traditional categories that we use. If I'm in Eastern Oregon and I could have a huge ranch, a ton of cattle, doing pretty well, and drought comes along and my business closes down, it's not going to be based on, it's going to be based on where I am and the impact, the climate change impact of my area. That's important. So it's, I guess that's when I think somehow the definition has to somehow start with its location based and the particular climate change impact of that location, and who's going to be disproportionately impacted by that climate change. I can tell you, people here on the coast, especially North Coast, are going to be impacted by the lack of drinking water because of climate change. And we're trying to respond in different ways to protect that source. And it impacts all of us. But we're disproportionately impacted because of where we are and what we depend on to live.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Guy, for that. I saw a couple hands go up while you were talking. So I think Alex, your hand is up first, and then Teresa.
Yeah, and I could sort of see your point, Guy, but I kind of just wanted to respond to that. Yes, sure, it's location based, but like given the global nature of climate change, everybody's going to be impacted somehow. And I think this isn't sort of picking and choosing, what areas are going to be impacted. It's more like within the areas that are going to be impacted or given a specific impact of climate change, whose resilience is going to be affected the most, I guess. Like I think about even myself, like one of the big climate risks out in Eastern Oregon, well, all of Oregon, is wildfire. And so, if my house burns down, I'm going to get a sweet $200,000 homeowners insurance payment, versus someone who is low income they might get some state recovery funds, but they're sort of up a creek. And same with, if salmon go extinct in these systems in the upper Columbia, I will change my diet. I will be eating less fish, but you have tribes up here that's their way of life. And so while it's sort of sad for me, it's a complete, erasure of their centuries, millennia old way of life. And so it's kind of I think the spatial dynamic matters, but there's not really anywhere on Earth that I could think of that's, either for the variety of impacts or just the nature of globalization that isn't somehow going to be impacted. I could think of an impact everywhere. It's who has the resources to adapt to those impacts and who does not. I think that's sort of what this definition gets at.
And I appreciate that, Alex. And I thought that through. I said, I have, you have house and fire insurance, and I have the ability to move somewhere else where there's water, drinking water. Those are secondary responses. I mean, we're initially going to be impacted by whatever it is, drought, wildfire, flood, whatever it is. And except for maybe our dairy farmers here in Tillamook County, everybody else can move. They can't. And then I started thinking that, okay, there is a secondary thing. You can move somewhere, build another house. Maybe you won't be able to build it in another wildfire area. So that's going to disproportionately impact not just you, but the people who depend on you in that area. People who lose their homes, and I can know in the local wildfire we had here 2 years ago, we are now using a lot of state funds and other funds to rebuild those homes. And that's being done by taxpayer money and whatever. You keep going up the chain. And I thought, it's really complicated to assess the impact that a particular wildfire would have or whatever, because it keeps going on, people moving, people losing jobs, people getting tax funded relief, people, whatever. And that gets complicated for me because it's the initial impact of climate change that starts all this, and it impacts us all the same. You'll lose a house, somebody else will lose a house. You may not be able to rebuild in the area where you live. You may have to relocate. Everybody else might have to relocate as well. We don't have drinking water here in a coastal community. I guess we can truck water in. I don't know, but I think it's too complicated to try to judge the impact economically, socially, after the initial impact. And the initial impact doesn't pick and choose people based on color or whatever. It picks and chooses based on where you live and your location.
Yeah, and thanks, Guy. And I know Teresa, you had your hand up and Helena, I see your hand as well. So we'll get to you, Teresa, in just a second. One thing you did, I would note that in the definition, we do have coastal communities as called out specifically.
Yeah, but it's
so. Well, let's go out to Teresa.
Yeah.
I do also think locality is important, but within a locality, people of different social status and financial incomes and economic status, it does make a difference. Like within coastal community, people who have less money, and of those who often have less money are often those who have been historically excluded from public policies that exclude certain communities based on their race and income and whatever. Like if you want to talk about locality, for example, in Portland, the heat dump 3 years ago, of all the people, of the 100 people or so that died, a lot of them are living in red-lined areas, and those were specifically targeting Black and Brown communities that still live in those communities today, or even houseless communities who just don't have the financial and economic or whatever status to even escape from those heat dumps. And those are the economic and racial statuses that you are talking about. Yes, the heat doesn't pick and choose based on your rate, but the ability to escape or respond to these events are largely based on your race and economic status. So I still don't think, this definition is an over complicated definition or something. I do think there has to be equity considerations that goes into, who gets impacted the most. And, I know location could be different locations could have different outcomes and different, demographic compositions, but within, say coastal communities, sorry, I'm just repeating myself, but it does make a difference. And I just want to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. That's good insight, I think. Helena.
Thanks. Yeah, I kind of wanted to just build upon this. I think this is a really good conversation to have. This is a really important topic, I think, when we're discussing climate change, and other things as well. Speaking for the Coquille Indian tribe, not any other tribal nation or any representation from any other tribe or tribal membership. But while climate change does affect all of us, the whole world, right? At least for the Coquille Indian tribe, the place is the tribe. The tribe is the place. You can't separate the two. So if climate change is impacting the place, it's impacting the tribe. Tribal members here may have access to go and hunt and fish and gather in other locations, but the Coquille watershed, the Coquille River, those species that depend upon it, that are being impacted by climate change, are directly impacting tribal membership, directly impacting lifeways that the tribe has in connection with that place, in connection with their ancestors, in connection with their elders. And that can't be discounted, absolutely cannot be discounted. So while I agree that climate change certainly impacts all of us, it is going to impact tribes. It already is. And I think this is an important statement, an important definition to have. And I think how it's incorporated in this language is important and does give difference to rural communities, coastal communities, and others that are traditionally underrepresented. And I think that that's a broad enough term that other communities that aren't included in this definition could fall under. So that's just my piece on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Helena. I think we mentioned this last time, that this language, we took it out of existing state statute with environmental justice that included, impacts to climate change within that definition. And it's also used in DEQ's climate protection program or something very similar to it, and is also consistent with the direction that the OWEB board's equity statement is also going. So I think there's some pretty good alignment with this definition and existing statute, where other natural resource agencies have incorporated it into their policy, as well as where the OWEB board is looking to go with their equity statement. So,
third time around, I haven't made an impact on that yet.
Well, I appreciate I appreciate the discussion, Guy, and really thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, and I guess part of, and I think it's already been said about we don't want to give the impression that climate change is not impacting all of us, and it will across the, if 1 million Bangladeshis have to move out of the lowlands because of rising seas, that will ultimately impact us, everyone in the world. And so there's going to be rolling consequences of climate change. And I think sometimes definitions give the impression that some of us are above those consequences. And that was kind of my general reaction to this statement. And I appreciate the tribal reference and the Coquille, and where it's a combination of both site and culture and just the lifeblood of the community. And sometimes I think that Native Americans in our area are probably the best in some ways to adapt to climate change. They've been doing it for thousands of years. So I have mixed feelings on this. I understand. I mean, the group wants to move forward, and that's fine. And I understand that this aligns with other statements. And I mean, we had this discussion before, but it doesn't change my feeling about that. It's a bit misguided. But thanks for giving the opportunity to talk about it anyways, Eric. So
yeah, thank you, Guy. Appreciate that. Okay, so we've gone through the 3 evaluation criteria along with the definitions. Any last or burning thoughts, questions, comments? And then Jesse, I did see you highlighted whenever. But before we get there, anything on 1, 2, or 3 that we need to get back to? Okay, not seeing any. Guy, you brought this one up as well. So is whenever the correct term, or should it be wherever?
Yeah, and again, I'm not the English major here, so I just thought when I read it, it should read whenever possible, or when possible, but not wherever. But somebody who's more in tune to the grammar, I think it should be whenever possible. Yeah.
I tend to agree, Guy, and it's funny. I actually, as one is wont to do, I Googled whenever versus wherever, and it's a Shakira song, actually, wherever, whenever. So you have to go through probably a page of references to Shakira before you get to some of that.
Okay.
But it's actual. I think you're right. I think it's whenever. Yeah. And if we're wrong,
somebody will correct us.
Somebody will correct us. Okay, so any other comments? So I think we're at a pretty good place right now.
We have rules. Okay? We have rules written by a committee. What could be wrong?
I think I'm really pleased with where we're at right now, and I so appreciate the discussion and all the thought from this group that's gone into developing these. I'm going to suggest. I know we're probably getting towards the end of this meeting, but I'm going to suggest we just take a quick kind of a 10-minute break before we get to the fiscal impacts and then the next steps. So why don't we return at 2:33. Okay, well, welcome back. 10 minutes goes quick. So the next item on the agenda is for fiscal impacts. And we do have a statutory requirement to seek the RAC's input on whether the proposed rules will have a fiscal impact and what the extent of that impact will be, and whether the rules would have a significant adverse impact on small businesses. And the way that the statute is written, small businesses aren't OWEB grantees, but we do know that you all work with small businesses to implement projects. So would have a really good idea if the proposed rules would have an adverse impact on small businesses. So we include this information in the formal notice of proposed rulemaking that OWEB files with the Secretary of State's office when we put the draft rules out for public comment. And so in addition to impacts on small businesses, we need to incorporate language around if there's any impacts to state agencies, units of local government, or just the public that might be economically affected by the rule. So I wanted just to open it up for RAC discussion. If you all can identify if there's any areas where you think there would be adverse economic impacts based on the rules that we have discussed. And just to note that we don't see any adverse impacts. We typically, I don't know if we've ever, when we've gone through rulemaking, and oftentimes we've had evaluation criteria as a part of that rulemaking, we have not ever identified there being an adverse impact with our grant programs, but we do want to offer that opportunity for folks. Okay. Not hearing or seeing that the RAC has identified any adverse economic impacts that these rules, if adopted by the board, would have across the state. So we'll then move on to wrap up. So we don't have any more meetings scheduled at this point. We're at I think, a really good spot when it comes to the draft rules. And so what we will be doing next is putting these out for public comment through that formal process that I talked about just a little bit there through the Secretary of State's office. So probably get these out for comment, looking at probably late April is my best guess at this point. And public comment would run likely through May, maybe into early June. OWEB staff then reviews all the public comment that comes in, and we develop a response document as well. So anybody that has comments, we do review and respond to those comments, and perhaps we'll offer some revisions to the draft rules based on the public comment, and then prepare the final draft of the rules that will go before the OWEB board in July. So that's the timeline that we're working under right now, but I'll stop and see if there's any questions. Okay. Well, I think that's all we have then for today. And I really want to express like deep gratitude for the thought and you know, everything else that went into this. I mean, this is less than a page, and we spent many hours working on it. And I think there's, you know, my hat's off to all of you for all the time spent on this, because I think we're at a good spot, and really appreciate all of you for participating on this rack. So with that, have a good rest of your afternoon. And if there's any questions, comments, concerns about any of this, please let Jesse and I know. Typically, we'll let you all know when we get the public comment. We'll send something out to the rack, let you all know kind of what came in, how it was responded to by OWEB staff, and what the final set of rules that will be going before the board in July. So look for that, yeah, probably here in a few months. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.